what I was going to say is just before we talk about that, the ARPs, because the ARP is such a big part of Tony's sound, is this is a Fender blender. And Steve Hackett used this. It's a sort of like a fuzz pedal from Fender. And actually, a company I do some work with, IK Multimedia, has a package called Amplitude Fender, and this is modeled inside of it. So that's another side of things, like I do with the sampling. But I'm always sort of nudging IK to model the effects pedals. So that you can have a virtual recreation, because some of these are vintage. This one they did a reissue of. Anyway, Tony had this built into his RMI, so it was like right over here, and so he could have a fuzzed piano sound as well. Again, further making it a little bit more like a synth, and but have it conveniently modded so it was inside the unit.
But part of the unit, so that you can actually manipulate the knobs without having to bend down on the floor.
Yeah, and less individual components when you're going on the road, I would imagine as well. All these pedals and everywhere. It's one thing if you're a guitar player.
Right.
It's another thing if you're a keyboard player and you got all these pedals. So having something that you're going to use. In fact, I wonder if he had the phaser built in too. Now that I think about it, he may have. I'd have to look. I have the pictures though of it. So, yeah. Anyway, the ARP.
Pretty damn cool. And I noticed it actually has 2 speakers in it.
Yeah, I mean they're not particularly good, but it's good for auditioning.
Right, you would use that, say, while you're setting up your patch for the next song, just to audition to make sure that you got it all right.
Yeah, I mean it's like a little monitor system or whatever. But anyway, yeah, the ARP 2600. I think he eventually. This is one of those synths that, like, I think for a while belonged to other people or the studio they were in, or I know Brian Eno. I think. Worked on the lamp a little bit, and he may have used this. He also probably used this, which Brian Eno is sort of known for. This is an EMS Synthy.
Can we spin this around?
Sure.
Take a look at it.
It's a beautiful.
It certainly is. Now it would sit something like this, and it probably would have would it sit down like this, or you have a stand for it?
Like a stand or something. And basically, you route things with these battleship-like, matrix.
You sank my battleship. Right, now would this be something that he would have taken out on the road?
Tony didn't. Pink Floyd used this a lot. This is the Dark Side of the Moon synth for On the Run, and they used it. But Eno used it on a lot of stuff back then. So I don't know for sure, but I think that this may have been used for some of the effects, like the wind sounds. But definitely the ARP 2600 was used for the waiting room, and some of those interval. Ravine and all these atmospheric bits. It had a built-in spring reverb. It's a semi-modular synth, so you can patch things and be very creative with the sound. Tony ended up owning one later. Well, he owned that one that we saw at the farm, which was the Rev 3.001 or whatever. But I don't know. I think Dave Henschel had one when they were working on Trick of the Tail, and then he eventually got one, something along those lines. And then he used it on tour later on and then there were 3 tour, I think. And but it's a great synth, and it was used on some Genesis albums, including The Lamb. But what Tony used, Tony was big on ARP. He used this ARP Quadra later on, but on The Lamb.
But this was kind of his bread and butter.
Yeah, I mean
like the solo for a lot of the keyboard lines and a lot of the keyboard solos on The Lamb. This was the axe.
Absolutely, it's the pro soloist. And what a lot of people don't know is that it's largely a preset synth. And I had a cool conversation with Tony about it, sort of like, a lot of people don't know, and I'm like, your sound was basically the presets. But the thing about it was, first of all, the presets are great, and it has a very particular characteristic, like so it has this portamento, and the way that it works is you have aftertouch, which is one of the earliest synths to have this pressure sensitivity on the keyboard. I can bring in vibrato, or I can change the pitch, or I can even do wow effect. No, that sounds not very.
Wow.
There's a lot of different things you can do. And then you would, and then you have these different presets. So, sorry. So a lot of these iconic Tony Banks sounds that you hear in Riding the Scree and Cinema Show has quite an array of them, the original, are just flipping through the presets on these toggle switches and using the pressure sensitivity to get the bends and all these other things, which, by the way, was very... only certain people use this. I think Patrick Moraz used it, maybe Joe Zawinul. And you heard it, I think the Grateful Dead, like you definitely heard this sound as like an ARP sound, which is very different than the mini mode, which is a very popular synth. But with the mini mode, you had so much more control because you had these pitch wheels and mod wheels, and which eventually became like the
standard. But it didn't have presets.
No.
So on the
they did have one called the Moog Satellite.
Right.
They did have it. There was their version of this, but that I don't know if
but
anyone
not
used
the mini mode.
Barely.
But on the Pro Soloist, so it wouldn't be unusual. Say, for instance, on Riding the Scree, he's changing the sound as he's soloing, like that. Because if I'm not mistaken, there's a bunch of different sounds through that song. But that would all be Pro Soloist. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing little device. I mean, again, and from the 70s, and yours is in such good nick. I mean, we walk in here and the stuff, it literally looks like it's brand new. It's like walking into the Lamb. Wait, and we're back in time with the Lamb. So, now, I was asking you earlier, I was walking through looking at it, and I found this box. It says nothing on it. And I looked on the back of it, and I don't know if you can make that. It says old. What can you tell me about this old box?
Well, so as I was saying, we did this, sampling at the farm at their studio, and we sampled some really cool sounds. We sampled the Rickenbacker double neck and the micro frets and everything. So that was the bass and electric 12-string that Mike used on the Lamb. So we sampled that so people can recreate that. And then I asked Dale Newman about this guy, and basically it's called the Shaftesbury Duo Fuzz. And the Musical Box had actually borrowed this, I think, for a little while, and then gave it back. Now I'm borrowing it for the purposes of getting iCable.
Keeping it.
No, Fuzz is mine. No, I got IK Multimedia to model it because they're so rare. I couldn't even find one to buy it. What it is basically it's a fuzz box. And it has two settings here. One is sort of a straight fuzz, another is like an octave fuzz. And Steve Hackett used it a lot of the guitar sounds on the Lamb. That this gives a lot of the character to it. And they're similar. It's very similar to the Univox Super Fuzz. And there's a few remakes that are similar actually.
Right, but as we know, similar doesn't mean the same.
No.
And when you're looking, as a musician, when you're looking for something that's truly unique and a specific sound, similar is just not going to cut it.
Well, that's why I try to urge companies like IK and these other companies to just model these things, because otherwise, you'll never. And it's like, well, why do I need another wah-wah or what? It's like, well, if you want that sound,
right? It's
the character of the sound. It plays such a huge part. Here's another one actually that Mike used. It's called the Super Tone Bender. And he used this in a Marshall Super Fuzz, which is very similar fuzz box from England. And basically, like the bass, that aggressive bass was a Rickenbacker, like a 4001, but he had the double neck version, through a pedal like this, or the Marshall.
Well, it was super.
It was super. And they do make remakes of these pedals, and sometimes they're pretty accurate, and sometimes maybe like the components aren't exactly the same, whatever it is about the vintage. So the modeling is cool, and of course the real thing, if you can find it. They're very collectible, like all this stuff now.
Yeah.
For a while, I remember I used to collect this stuff in the early 90s, and people thought it was, like, doesn't have MIDI, it's garbage.
It was the
time and I knew.
I'm
like, no, man, this is cool stuff. I've always wanted it. And now it's hard to get again, but luckily we've, spent a lot of time over the years collecting it, mainly to sample, because that's my business. But secretly, I'm a instrument lover / Genesis freak, and so I have all of the type of keyboards that to do the Lamb.
He's one of us.
One wanted to do it, which I am doing, by the way.
Thank you for collecting all this wonderful equipment and for giving us a brief run through of some of the pieces that Tony may have used or did use on the Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and for keeping this wonderful equipment alive for the next generations of Lamb fanatics and Genesis fanatics to enjoy. Dave, thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.
And we'll see you in New York City. Back in New York City. Grammy Award-winning mix engineer and producer Tom Lord-Alge, who not only has no life,
obviously, since he's doing this and stuff with me.